Hello, my name is Jerry Hauser. I'm the faculty ombuds at CU, and I want to thank you for attending today's Lunch and Learn, De-escalating tensions, flight, fight, and the communication option. If you have questions or comments, please use the chat box, and also remember that comments on chat are visible by all who are in today's webinar. I'd like to begin with a poll. And so I'd like you to share whether you have been in situations where tension surfaced and suddenly differences escalated to conflict. Wow, everybody said they've been in those situations. So here's the result of our poll, or almost everybody. 91% said yes, they had, and about 9% said they're not sure. Sometimes what we find ourselves in situations where escalation seems par for the course because the person that we're interacting with tends to process disagreement as a threat, and they go into fight mode. And at other times, the escalation catches us by surprise. It seems to come out of the blue. Regardless, conflictual situations are usually experienced as stressful, and they require action to de-escalate the conflict so we can move forward. I think it's important that we recognize and acknowledge that the pressures and expectations on CU's faculty, graduate students, researchers, staff, and administrators to perform at a high level can be stressful. It's important that we acknowledge also our professional responsibility to not let the stresses of our work overwhelm our relationships with our colleagues, students, professors, researchers, staff, administrators. De-escalating tension is an important step in that direction. So the first thing to help de-escalate tension is to recognize when somebody is getting agitated. Here are some, I'd like you to think of some signs that someone is getting agitated. Could you put those in chat, please? Raised voice. That's right. Unfocused gaze, when their gaze changes, that's good. Change of eye contact, shutting down, tone, stop communicating, disengage from the conversation. Wow, these are great. Eyebrows furrowed. These are all terrific. So what we find is that there are things like these. People clench their fists. They have sudden changes in body language or tone. They're pacing or fidgeting, changes in type of eye contact, rooster stance, where they're sort of puffing their chest out and their arms are waving, disruptive behaviors. Many of the things here and the things that you mentioned, those are all signs that a person is getting agitated. And when people feel threatened, they experience fear. And fear produces anxiety. And so when people are experiencing anxiety, they try to reduce the anxiety. They tend to defend themselves. And this often results in what many of us are familiar with, fight or flight. We respond to either defend ourselves against a threat, fight, or we flee from it, fight. Sometimes work situations can be threatening. For example, you could be terminated. You could have a demotion, public humiliation, salary cut, inadequate resources. All of these things can create tension in the workplace, and we could experience them as frightening and or fearful, and we might want to have a defensive response. What might flight or fight look like in these situations? Well, in a flight response, flight defense, we can quit, we could move to another job, we could remove ourselves from our current role. And what about a fight response? Well, we could align ourselves with those who have more power. We could try to make ourselves more visible and essential to the unit. Um, we could sabotage others to keep our position or our power. All of these are things that perhaps you've experienced in your workplace. I know I've experienced them in my career. And usually they don't produce the best result. There's another option I want to explore with you, and that's a communication option. It's called working through. Working through is a communication option for quelling anxiety, which can diffuse a situation. Unlike more primitive organisms, humans have evolved a highly developed cerebral cortex, which gives us the capacity to manage our primitive instinctual defensive reflexes of flight or fight in favor of calmly and rationally working through our anxiety in a civilized and a civil manner. Working through means calmly discussing a threatening or anxiety-producing issue to work toward a solution. Working through can only occur if the perception of threat is reduced, which reduces anxiety and avoids defensiveness. And the key factor here is something that has been recognized since antiquity. When there is a threat on the horizon, people become anxious. In order to reduce their anxiety or change their emotion, you have to change their perception of what's on the horizon. And so the key factor is to reduce the perception of threat that will reduce anxiety. It will de-escalate the situation, which in turn encourages a non-defensive response. So what can you do in order to help de-escalate a conflictual situation? Well, first, and this may seem obvious, but for some people, insensitive response is their default. I'd like to mention some really bad communication choices. Here are some surefire ways to escalate a minor miscommunication to a full-blown conflict. And maybe you've experienced some. I hope you've not engaged in them and seen things flare up. First of all, you can tell people what they're feeling. I don't know about you, but I really hate it when somebody tells me, this is how, well, don't get angry with me. This is what you're feeling right now. How do you know what I'm feeling? Or why are you being defensive? Actually, I'm not defensive. I'm offended by the way that you're behaving. Tell them why they did what they did or said what they said. Oh, the reason you did that is you're jealous of me. Or you just said that because you want to get even with me. Boy, that really makes a conflict worse. I made that mistake once. Boy, I learned a hard lesson from it. Another is to raise your voice. This technique is great for getting people's emotional juices flowing. And if you throw in a finger pointing or two, leaning forward, boy, you're really going to push somebody over the edge. Or you could focus on the past, what I refer to as trying to litigate things. When you focus on the past, you focus on something that your interlocutor has no power to change. Refuse to discuss actions for behaviors going forward or ways of interacting, and instead insist they deconstruct and defend their past words and actions. Since you can't change what's already happened, you lock the other person into a conflict with no way out, or you can walk away. Just as you get people agitated, you say, you're always so difficult, or I'm not going to talk anymore with you, and you walk away from them. Well, these are tongue-in-cheek, obviously, if they were taken as suggestions. They're not. These are obviously really bad choices. Alternatively, you can try options that may prove useful for promoting a dialogue focused on working through. You can listen. People really when people who are agitated often feel they're not heard, they're not listened to. So listening is a powerful tool. When other people think that you've not listened to their concerns, they'll almost invariably see you as a threat. Listening reduces anxiety over an outcome. The second thing you can do is acknowledge and accept their emotions or feelings. Building on the idea of listening, acknowledge and accept the other person's feelings without pausing to without passing judgment on them. I don't recommend telling them how they feel. It is usually okay to ask them how they feel and then to acknowledge it. Consistently reestablish throughout your conversation that you appreciate the other person sharing their opinion with you, that you respect them, even if things are getting heated. Remembering a person is human is important. It's not helpful or productive if pushing your own agenda is your main priority in a conversation. Going into a conversation with a mindset that the other person is your opponent is incredibly detrimental. So begin by speaking to a specific point that they made and that you can agree with. No matter how much you think you disagree, you can usually, maybe even always, find something you agree upon, even if it's broad idea that they both want the best for the department, that you want a thriving research environment, or that you want a welcoming workplace for you and your coworkers. Call out a point the person made that taught you something, even if you disagree with others. This shows that you value the conversation and are open to learning from the other person. It fosters trust and allows the conversation to continue with a mutually respectful tone. Mention that you disagree, but frame it in such a way that it allows a collaborative conversation and you welcome their opinions on your perspective. So bring up your key points, explain why you think this way, but keep an open mind as to why people might disagree. For example, I believe that personnel decisions must be based on what's in the dossier. Otherwise, we're open to subjective opinions that may not be supported by facts, which is why I objected to bringing in your advisee's complaints. I know you disagree. Can you help me better understand your view? Try to get to the root of your respective beliefs as another way of finding common ground. The deeper you go, the more you have in common. Control your tone and body language. A significant portion of the message people receive from you in face-to-face communication is conveyed through body language and your voice and tone. If you look threatening, you are threatening. Imagine, for example, that somebody said, "You dirty dog," to you. Well, it would all depend. Suppose they were a longtime friend. Suppose that you, in that context, you played a joke on them, and you pulled a fast one, and they caught on, and they said to you, "Oh, you dirty dog," with a smile on their face and a tone in their voice. And we'd know that it was a joke and everybody had a good time. Or if somebody wasn't your really good friend and you did something that they didn't like and they said to you, "You dirty dog," with a tone that was fighting words, you'd know that, boy, we're in for trouble now. So if you want to de-escalate a conflict, remember to control your tone and body language. Focus on the future. Getting hung up on the past is a surefire way to make a conflict worse. It's a form of litigation where there are winners and losers. It's unlikely your counterpart will concede. And the more they're going to dig in. When you shift the conversation to the future, you engage both you and the other person in a problem-solving activity rather than a fault-finding exercise. You create hope and you make yourself less threatening. And finally, welcome feedback by asking genuine questions. So let's consider a scenario that offers opportunities for walking through. So we're going to talk, I want to read through this with you, and then I'm going to want you to think of some options that you might use for walking through. Okay, you are an untenured assistant professor. Your department is organized by wings, with each wing having its senior members You have considerable national and international reputations, among whom are some of the leading women in your male-dominated discipline. Professor Jenna Marshall, a senior woman, regularly visits you before faculty meetings to instruct you on how to vote so that your wing gets what it wants and needs. It is clear that she expects you to vote in the right way. And although she hasn't threatened you in the past, you have sensed you cannot count on Marshall's support if you vote contrary to her instructions. Last Friday, you had a meeting with Marshall to discuss your research agenda. Marshall ripped into your project, which grew from your postdoc work, as ill-conceived and not keeping with the agenda of the wing, which came as a shock to you, since that was the topic of your job talk. She then questioned your career commitment, stating the time you need to spend with your toddler son was always going to conflict with the effort you could put into establishing yourself as a leading researcher. Given this constraint, she said, going off in a direction independent of the wing did not bode well for tenure. Marshall told you she will support your tenure progression if your research agenda were to align with hers, but if not, you should not count on her support. Tomorrow you have a scheduled meeting with Marshall. What to do? Okay, so here's some questions. First, why is, and let's put some of this in, let's put this in chat. Why is Marshall seeing this as a career-threatening position on your research? Why is she taking this career-threatening position on your research? Well, let's start this way. Is she in fight mode or flight mode? Fight, 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 fight. Everybody sees it. Okay, she's in fight mode. Terrific. Okay, let's try the next one. What is the threat your work poses to her? Why, she sees herself sunsetting. Yeah, and you're up and coming. Competition, competing research. Doesn't align with what she perceives as, well, okay, I'm not sure her work is threatened, but her agenda is. Good idea. Okay, she's trying to leverage your vulnerability in whatever way allows her to control your voice. Oh, those are all really great. Okay, let's now go to the third one. What might be a strategy for working through? So remember now, we're thinking about, okay, there's a threat, it's on the horizon, that gives rise to anxiety. Anxiety leads her to fight. Now we got to change whatever's on the horizon. And the things that you've noticed are competing agenda, or sunsetting career, or she's trying to leverage your vulnerability, which she wants to control your vote, and she's concerned that if she can't control your vote, she's going to lose power in the department. All right. So here were the options that we had talked about before. So let's try to put some ideas that you might have for what working through might look like. How might you, what could you do? Well, first thing you could do is you could do nothing. The second thing you could do is you could talk to a colleague to seek advice. Okay, that's sometimes a good idea. You could seek out the chair for advice. Okay, you're untenured. You could talk to the chair. You might want to be really careful in that conversation with the chair. Make sure that it's confidential. Be sure you're careful about how you frame it. Consult your faculty ombuds to work on options. I'm biased, so I always think that that's a good idea. Try to de-escalate the tension with Marshall by acknowledging her concerns, and then what? So how might you reframe the discussion to show how your project is not a threat to Marshall's? What are your communication strategies? Okay, so ask her for a weekly meeting to ask for her options and opinions and input. Okay. Focus on the future by helping her see how you bring a different value to the department, which could attract more diverse students and bring more attention to the department because of her research topics are diverse. That's Christy. That's a good idea. So you're trying to use your research to broaden the frame. Okay. Brian says one could try to re-identify the mission and goals of the work, of your work, Brian. I'm assuming you mean your work. So you're trying to say, okay, so I don't think you've really understood the mission and goals of what I'm trying to accomplish. All right, that's a legitimate strategy. Eva, acknowledge her as a leader in the field. Okay, so you're not trying to challenge her, but rather to align with her as a leader, and you're don't want to pose a threat to her, at least politically, although she's still kind of worried about your research. Brian, so you're, oh, I see what you're saying, Brian. So you're aligning your work with her work. Yeah, okay, good. Angie, acknowledge that you both want what is best for the department and value the research. Okay, and yeah, so she might want to say, okay, yeah, this is the value of our research is its value to the department. So you're trying to reframe the work within the department. All of those are legitimate options to pursue. And the thing that's interesting here, if we go back to this chart that we have earlier, is that we're trying to use these sorts of strategies in order to work through, to foster dialogue. So Eva says, avoid the voting pressure issue until the relationship is better. Eva, really smart idea. you don't want to, but at some point you have to deal with that issue. This is not, I mean, this is not entirely, this is not entirely fictive. I have not experienced directly myself, but the colleagues who have had the senior person call them in and saying, this is how you're supposed to vote. And they call me up, a former student, and say, what do you do? Wow, big problem. Or junior people come up to me and said, I just had a meeting with a senior person and he, gave me this leverage. What do you do? So what you've acknowledged is you sort of tacitly acknowledged and accept her emotions and feelings. So you didn't want to tell her, don't feel that way. You were showing appreciation and respect. I came here because you're a leader in the field. You framed the disagreement as a collaborative conversation. What we want is what's best for the department. What's best for the department is going to be best for the wing. You start with what you agree with. Again, what's best for the department. You try to reframe your disagreement as a collaborative conversation. So here's what I'm trying to do, and here's how it aligns with your work. All of these are really good strategies that you can pursue in order to move the conversation forward. So where are we? I guess we're at the point where we can summarize what we've talked about, which is that, excuse me, I'm a little ahead of myself here. And that is that we can, when we feel threatened, we experience fear. And that fear produces anxiety. And when we're anxious, we have a strong desire to defend in order to reduce our anxiety. When we are anxious, then we want to reduce anxiety because this often leads to fight or flight. We respond either to defend ourselves against the threat, fight, or flee from it, fight. However, unlike most primitive organisms, humans have evolved a highly developed cerebral cortex, which gives us the capacity to manage our primitive instinctual reflexes of fight or flight in favor of calmly and rationally working through our anxieties. And working through means calmly discussing a threatening, anxiety-provoking issue to work toward a solution. The key to de-escalating tensions is to reduce the perception of threat, which reduces anxiety. It will de-escalate the situation, and that will facilitate non-defensive responses. So I want to thank you for joining me, and I want to thank the Ombuds Office for asking me to present today.